Americans love us some soda pop, and we feel like we should have the freedom to drink however much of it we want in the biggest cups we feel like drinking it out of. There are some in the scientific community, including the New England Journal of Medicine, and folks in government that agree with them, that believe we should be discouraged from drinking so much soda by a tax on that beverage. However, there are always going to be interest groups standing in the way of such legislation. In this case, that interest group would be the American Beverage Association, a combination of several different soda producers, and they have plenty of money to spend, but notice the difference between how much they spent towards legislation in 2008 versus the following year. The difference is because in 2009 they were fighting legislation that would tax soda pop. Now obviously, the American Beverage Association has an interest in stopping that type of legislation because it would hurt their bottom line. And so you'll see in the following commercial their attempt at backlash to get Americans to not favor this type of tax.
Feeding a family is difficult enough in today's economy. Now some politicians want the government telling me how I should do it. They want to put new taxes on a lot of groceries I buy, like soft drinks, juice drinks, sports drinks, even flavored waters, trying to control what we eat and drink with taxes. Give me a break. I can decide what to buy without government help. The government is just getting too involved in our personal lives.
Tell the candidates, government needs to trim its budget fat and leave our grocery budgets alone.
As you might have guessed, the American Beverage Association was successful, their money went to good use, and the legislation failed. Now this, of course, is an interest group that serves a relatively narrow group of individuals, particularly the companies involved in that interest group. But generally, we know that interest groups are supposed to be another linkage institution on that road between us, the people, and the government that makes policy. And you can certainly view interest groups with disdain, or you could view them as another way for you to be connected to policy. And pretty much whomever you are, there is an interest group for you to help you express yourself and influence policy in one way or another at the government level. And here's the top 25 interest groups in America. Perhaps one of these looks appealing to you. Constitutionally, ain't nothing wrong with interest groups, just a bunch of people getting together, trying to voice their opinion. Boy, has there been an increase in the number of interest groups though, mostly because of technology, and it's so much easier now with your cell phone and the internet and websites to be able to see what's happening in Washington, D.C. and voice your opinion, and with a click of a button, tell the congressman how to act. If you ask Americans who's really in control of the government, it varies from year to year. You can see at many times they feel that big interest groups are in control, not the majority of Americans. If Americans are justified in their disdain for interest groups and the power that they hold, it's because the interest groups are just one corner of a bigger picture, a trifecta called the Iron Triangle. And the way this works essentially is you have the interest groups giving money and support to the campaigns of legislators, congressmen. Once those congressmen are elected, they feel the need to help out those interest groups. They do so through a third party, the bureaucracies. They give political support and funding to that bureaucracy, which in turn lowers regulations for the interest groups or gives them special favors that in turn benefit that interest group. And it's a cycle that goes around and around. Let's look at an example of this iron triangle. Let's say you have an industry like Big Tobacco. Of course, they need to grow the tobacco in order to make the cigarettes. So they start off by giving some money to the campaign of somebody from their state in Carolinas or something, and get that person elected to Congress. That congressman then makes sure he's on a committee to send more money through the U.S. Department of Agriculture to make subsidies for tobacco farmers in, say, South Carolina. And those farmers can then grow and sell their tobacco for less money, and the tobacco companies can then earn more profits from selling their cigarettes. I know you're all wondering, how is an interest group formed in the first place? Well, it starts off, think of freedom of assembly, a group of people that share something in common, and they decide that they want to somehow effect change policy-wise with regards to that interest. Anybody that shares an interest is simply called a potential group. It's those members of that group that actually decide to band together and affect policy that the actual group. The problem is that oftentimes what the actual group is fighting for, policy-wise, is going to help them, but it's also going to help the whole potential group as well. This would be called a collective good. So you're thinking, okay, how does that actual group get folks to become part of their actual group when folks could just be what's called free riders, hanging out in the potential group, not having to do anything or pay money to support the cause? And so these actual interest groups sometimes have to get creative to recruit members who will actually participate. Listen, punk, let me give you one example of an actual group and how they get people to not be free riders. You see, Sonny, the AARP actually gives benefits like lower insurance rates, so that if you belong and you pay your dues, you get benefits, something out of it. And then you feel lucky, punk. You may think that the bigger your interest group, the more power you have. This is actually untrue. And this is because the more people that are in an interest group, the more opportunities for free riding. And if you think about when you listen to NPR or you watch PBS and they say they're having their happy fun drive, they want you to donate, and you probably think, there's millions of people that watch or listen to this program, so they don't need my money. It's the same thing with a big old interest group. It's better off being small and intimate, and people can feel that they're actually making a difference. Furthermore, it's best to have single issues, not big basket full of issues. So here's Code Pink. They protest war when there's a Republican president. For some reason, they don't protest war when there's a Democratic president. Anyways, that's not important. And then you also have folks that will focus specifically on pro-life or pro-choice issues, and also just on gun rights. So the more simple and single your issue is, the more power you're going to have. You may also assume that the more money a group has, the more influential they are. And while it's true that the top 25 interest groups in America spend over $1 million a year, there's actually a study that shows that more money doesn't necessarily mean more power in Congress. And here's why. The first reason is competition. See, we talked about hyperpluralism. The fact that there are so many interest groups in this country, and many of them have lots of money, if you have a liberal anti-weapon or anti-gun group, for instance, and they're spending lots of money, well, chances are on the other side you got the NRA or some very well-endowed pro-gun group spending just as much money. And so it kind of cancels each other out. We also see that, ironically, sometimes the goals of the wealthy interest groups and the middle class or lower class interest groups are not that far off. The example of soda that we looked at, obviously your big wealthy soda companies are going to want to stop the soda tax. Well, there was a big Latino lobby also arguing that in their communities it would hurt their bottom line or their family's budget to have to pay more for what they drink a lot of.
Now let's take a look at how interest groups shape policy.
Let's take a look at lobbying first. As you can see here, it doesn't have the best reputation in this country, maybe for good reason. The term lobbying came from when individuals who wanted something from senators or congressmen would show up at their hotel lobbies and wait for them to come down the elevator, and then they would attack them, so to speak, ask them for whatever they wanted. And really, a lobbyist now is anybody who works on behalf of a citizen or a group of citizens, an interest group, with the intent of influencing policy. And they can try to wine and dine the congressman, or they can give him some ideas, or they can even write legislation and hand it to the congressman and say, hey, why don't you introduce this as a bill? As you can imagine, some Americans might see these lobbyists as corrupt or taking advantage of their power and position, and so the government decided in 1995 to make it very much more transparent, and now we know where the money's coming from and how it's used to influence Congress. We've talked about the influence of money before in policy making. Well, before the congressman can make the policy, they have to be elected to office, and they need money to get elected to office. And so where does that come from? Many times from the lobbyists and the interest groups. They get these guys elected, and then of course they expect something in return. It happens on the Democrat and the Republican side. We might as well get used to it. As you might imagine, it takes a lot of work and money to get someone into Congress, and once they have that connection with that congressman or congresswoman who's able to hook you up as an interest group or lobbyist, you want to maintain that relationship. And so it's very likely that once you're the incumbent, the elected person in office, that you're going to stay there because the PACs and the interest groups are going to make sure that they continue to support you financially so they don't have to try to court somebody else later. So let's say you're an interest group and you can't get what you want through electioneering or through policy making. There are a couple other avenues you can follow. One is to sue. So an example of this is if you're an environmental group and you're not getting a law passed to stop a certain company or business from polluting, you can sue that business or company through the Federal Clean Air Act, for example, and they would obviously have to pay up. Nowadays, just the threat of a lawsuit will get companies to follow because they know that they're going to have to pay big bucks otherwise. And last but not least, the last resort would be to go to the people directly. Go to the folks. Say, hey guys, you wouldn't believe what these companies or these organizations are getting away with. And we can't get any help from the government, so we want you to help us. Example of this more recently was from 1994, where Clinton was having a hard time getting Congress to pass a Health Care Act. So he took it to the people through a bunch of commercials and hoped that they would then rally their congressmen, their representatives, to pass the danged bill. And here are a couple ads that follow. Please proceed to part 2 to see the video.